What if I told you one of the world's youngest presidents isn't leading a rich nation, but a country caught between war, poverty, and foreign control? What if I told you he's not a politician, but a soldier who rose in the trenches, not for power, but for purpose? This is not fiction. This is a real story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old leader who dared to defy France, stand against terrorism, and call out the global powers shaping Africa's destiny from behind closed doors. Love him or hate him, you can't ignore him. This is a story of revolution, resistance, and a continent on the edge of transformation. If this story inspired you, don't just sit back and watch. Like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on this historic journey. We want to hear your thoughts. Comment below and tell us, is Ibrahim Traoré the leader Africa has been waiting for? Or is his revolution doomed to fail? Your voice matters, because the world is changing, and you are a part of it. More nuanced analysis of Ibrahim Traoré's significance in 2025, spanning historical context, ideology, governance style, and geopolitical impact. Historical context and rise to power. September 30th, 2022, Traoré, then a 34-year-old army captain, led a military coup that ousted Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, who had himself taken power in a 2022 coup. Public sentiment. His rise was initially met with celebration by many young Burkinabe who felt the political elite had failed to protect citizens from Islamist insurgencies and economic hardship. His message was raw, anti-establishment, and deeply Pan-African, making him a symbol of resistance in the Sahel region. 2. Core ideology and beliefs. 1. Pan-Africanism and decolonization. Traoré has pushed for cultural decolonization, including replacing colonial judicial attire with Faso Dan Fani, a hand-woven Burkinabe fabric, promoting local languages and traditional values in education and administration. He speaks often of a united Africa, free from neo-colonial control, echoing the ideologies of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's iconic revolutionary leader. 2. Anti-imperialism. Firmly rejects French military presence and influence, including removing French troops and suspending some French media outlets. Promotes African solutions for African problems, distancing Burkina Faso from Western aid dependency. 3. Governance and domestic policy. 1. Military rule and stability. Traoré governs through a military junta, citing the urgent need to stabilize the country before transitioning to civilian rule. Despite his youth, he has centralized power quickly and taken aggressive actions. Froze assets of political opponents and suspected terrorists. Prioritized military spending and territorial reclamation from jihadist groups. 2. Security and controversy. The jihadist insurgency remains severe, with 40% of territory estimated to be outside state control. 2025 saw controversial military operations, including an incident where 58 Fulani civilians were killed, raising accusations of ethnic profiling and extrajudicial killings. Traoré defends such actions as necessary sacrifices in a total war for national survival. 4. Regional and global impact. 1. Sahel Alliance and regional shift. Under Traoré, Burkina Faso formed a security alliance with Mali and Niger, both also under military rule. These countries formed the EAS, Alliance of Sahel States, pulling out of ECOWAS in January 2024, calling it a Western puppet. This reflected historic realignment in West Africa, where military-led states are uniting under nationalist, anti-French ideologies. 2. Strategic partnerships. Russia. Traoré has embraced Russia for weapons, training, and diplomatic support. He visited Moscow in 2024 and was invited again for Victory Day 2025. Turkey, Iran, and China, also emerging as economic and security partners. U.S. and EU. Relations remain cold. Several human rights organizations have criticized his junta. V. Symbolic power. Traoré's image is iconic across Africa, especially among youth and students. His military fatigues, unpolished speeches, and Sankara-like charisma make him face a new African defiance. He's seen as a revolutionary idealist by supporters, a dangerous authoritarian by critics. Here's a focused breakdown on the regional impact. Redefining power in the Sahel under Ibrahim Traoré's leadership. Regional impact. Redefining power in the Sahel. 1. The rise of the Sahel military bloc. Traoré, alongside the juntas in Mali and Niger, has reshaped the power dynamics of the Sahel by forming the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. This bloc represents a direct challenge to ECOWAS and the African Union's traditional authority, a bold effort to break from neo-colonial structures and craft a new political identity for the Sahel, a regional call for sovereignty-first governance, rejecting foreign intervention, especially from France and Western partners. The AES now acts as a political, military, and ideological front, influencing neighboring countries and stirring Pan-African nationalist movements. 2. Withdrawal from ECOWAS, a historic rejection. In 2024, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger withdrew from ECOWAS, accusing it of enforcing Western economic and political interests, imposing sanctions that hurt ordinary people, supporting failed democratic elites who couldn't protect their nations. This move shook the foundations of regional diplomacy, signaled a turning point in post-colonial West African politics, encouraged public discourse in other countries about whether ECOWAS still serves African interests. 3. Sahel security cooperation. Under Traoré's influence, AES countries have intensified joint military cooperation to fight jihadist insurgents and stabilize border regions. Cross-border operations against extremist groups like JNIM and ISIS-L, shared military intelligence and planning, promotion of popular militias and volunteer forces, creating a community-based approach to defense. This has made AES a military political force, despite lacking international legitimacy. 4. Symbol of regional youth empowerment. Traoré's youthful image, military uniform, and anti-colonial rhetoric have inspired student protests and pro-sovereignty movements in Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, Togo, and beyond. New waves of youth-led Pan-Africanism, rejecting old political elites and foreign influence, calls for national dignity, indigenous development, and armed self-determination. His face and slogans like La Patrie ou la Mort have become icons of Sahelian resistance culture. 5. Tensions with pro-West African states. Burkina Faso's growing influence is causing friction with governments that remain aligned with France and Western institutions, fear the spread of coup legitimization, and militarized governance models, accuse AES of supporting instability across the region. But Traoré counters by accusing these governments of being foreign puppets out of touch with African realities. 6. Bordering on revolution. Through his regional efforts, Traoré is not just influencing policies, he is challenging decades-old power alignments, redefining what it means to govern in post-colonial Africa, inspiring a new generation to think beyond democracy as imported from the West, and instead build governance on African values, traditions, and urgency. Summary: Ibrahim Traoré has become a catalyst for regional transformation in the Sahel. He's leading a bold effort to detach West Africa from old systems, craft new alliances, and position the Sahel as a heartland of African resistance and renewal. Whether this becomes a model for the future or a moment of regional volatility depends on the outcomes. But the regional impact is already profound. Do not forget, like, share, and subscribe. FO More Story. Here's a deep dive into Ibrahim Traoré's global impact. Shift from West to multipolarity as of 2025. Global impact. Shift from West to multipolarity. 1. Breaking from the Western sphere. Ibrahim Traoré's rise marked a bold rupture with the West, especially France, Burkina Faso's former colonial ruler. Within months of taking power, he expelled French troops and shut down military agreements, ordered the closure of French military bases, and terminated defense cooperation, suspended French media outlets like RFI and France 24 for disinformation and neo-colonial propaganda. This wasn't just policy, it was symbolism. Traoré positioned Burkina Faso as a sovereign actor, no longer reliant on its former colonizer or Western narratives of democracy and aid. 2. Pivot to Russia and the East. In the vacuum left by the West, Traoré embraced a multipolar world vision, moving closer to Russia, welcomed military assistance, intelligence cooperation, and possibly Wagner-linked advisors. He visited Moscow and hailed Putin's stance against Western imperialism, Turkey and Iran, initiated partnerships in defense, infrastructure, and energy. China. While less ideological, China remains a quiet economic partner, particularly in mining and telecoms. This pivot isn't just about security. It's ideological. Traoré promotes respect-based partnerships, not aid tied to political conditions. He advocates South-South cooperation, positioning Africa as a global actor, not a recipient. 3. BRICS and the new global order. Traoré has expressed vocal support for BRICS expansion, seeing it as a counterbalance to the IMF, World Bank, and Western hegemony. A new global financial system, less dependent on the US dollar or euro. Africa's greater representation in international institutions, not as charity, but as equal partners. He's even suggested that Burkina Faso would consider aligning with BRICS, though formal steps remain unclear. 4. Pan-African diplomacy on the world stage. Ibrahim Traoré now represents more than Burkina Faso. He had become a symbol of African resistance to the Western order, regularly speaks out at continental forums and alternative summits, not just on Burkina's behalf, but for the Sahel and Francophone Africa at large. He frames his foreign policy as a second wave of decolonization, calling out economic exploitation, cultural domination, Western double standards on democracy and human rights. This resonates deeply across African civil societies, especially among youth. 5. Western reactions, sanctions, and silence. The EU and US condemned the coup but avoided full sanctions, wary of pushing Burkina Faso deeper into Russian influence. Aid was partially suspended, and Burkina Faso's diplomatic ties with the West grew colder. Western media often portray Traoré as a militarized autocrat, while Pan-African voices defend him as a sovereign patriot. 6. Burkina Faso is a geopolitical case study. Under Traoré, Burkina Faso has become a symbolic battleground in the global order. West versus multipolarity, democracy versus sovereignty, aid dependency versus resource nationalism. His policies invite polarized interpretations. Is he building African freedom or stifling rights under the guise of revolution? Summary: Traoré's Burkina Faso is at the center of a shifting global chessboard. By rejecting the West and embracing a multipolar, decolonized world vision, he's not just influencing alliances, he's challenging the very architecture of global power. His moves ripple far beyond West Africa, signaling that even small nations can disrupt old empires and demand a new place in the world order. If you're interested in this video, do not forget like, share, and subscribe for more deep story. Here's a detailed breakdown of Ibrahim Traoré's impact on international institutions in 2025. Impact on international institutions. 1. ECOWAS, West African bloc in crisis. Collapse of trust. Traoré's government, alongside Mali and Niger, withdrew from ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, in early 2024. This marked a historic rupture in regional integration efforts. The first formal exit of member states since ECOWAS was founded in 1975. Why the break? ECOWAS imposed sanctions after the 2022 coup, pressured the junta to return to civilian rule, was seen by Traoré and allies as acting on behalf of Western powers, especially France and the US. Consequences: ECOWAS is now weakened and divided. Other countries are debating its relevance and reform. AES, Alliance of Sahel States, is emerging as an alternative bloc, with its own defense and economic ambitions. 2. African Union, between principle and reality. Silent tensions. The African Union, AU, officially opposes coups and undemocratic regimes. However, it has not expelled Burkina Faso or AES members. It is trying to balance its anti-coup stance with the growing popularity of leaders like Traoré. Impact: the AU's authority is being quietly challenged. Traoré's popularity has split African public opinion on what leadership should look like. Some AU members are calling for a new definition of sovereign legitimacy, not just based on elections, but popular will and national defense. 3. United Nations, cautious engagement, limited action. The UN has expressed concern over press freedom, human rights, and delays in elections, provided humanitarian support for displaced people due to conflict, continued peacekeeping coordination in Sahel, but not directly in Burkina Faso. Why no strong sanctions? The UN is limited by geopolitical divisions. Russia and China often support non-interference. There is no global consensus on how to deal with the rise of military governments in Africa. Impact. Traoré is using the UN's cautious stance to claim moral high ground, saying, even the UN does not deny our right to self-defense and sovereignty. 4. European Union, from partnership to pushback, shift in relations. The EU froze portions of development aid, publicly criticized Burkina Faso's human rights record and military governance, warned against foreign interference, particularly Russia's role in the Sahel. Traoré's response. He called EU criticisms hypocritical and outdated, rejected conditional aid, and promoted a self-reliant African economy. Impact. The EU's influence in Burkina Faso is now minimal. Its stance has solidified Traoré's anti-Western image domestically and across the region. 5. International financial institutions. Fading relevance? Break from the IMF/World Bank model. Traoré has criticized loan-based development, calling it modern slavery, explored alternative partners like BRICS nations, particularly Russia and China, supported moves for African financial independence, e.g., ditching the CFA franc. Impact. The IMF and World Bank's influence is shrinking in Burkina Faso. Traoré's rhetoric may inspire other African countries to question the terms of global finance. Summary. A new era of friction and realignment. Traoré's leadership is forcing international institutions to rethink their approach to African politics. He has weakened ECOWAS, pressured the AU, and bypassed Western funding models. His assertive sovereignty is challenging the norms of post-Cold War liberal globalism. Whether this leads to a stronger multipolar world or increased instability remains to be seen, but the international institutional map is already shifting. Here's a detailed breakdown of the Western response to Ibrahim Traoré's leadership and Burkina Faso's geopolitical shift in 2025. Western response to Ibrahim Traoré's leadership. 1. France, the most direct target. Total diplomatic breakdown. French troops expelled from Burkina Faso in early 2023. French embassy staff restricted, media outlets banned, RFI, France 24. Military cooperation agreements terminated. French reaction. Official condemnations of the undemocratic regime shifted military focus to neighboring countries like Côte d'Ivoire and Chad. Lost major influence in Francophone West Africa, marking one of its worst diplomatic setbacks in decades. Impact. Traoré's stance inspired similar pushbacks in Mali and Niger. France is now seen by many West Africans as a fading force in the region. 2. United States strategic caution. Public position. Condemn the 2022 coup. Call for return to civilian rule. Express concern over human rights violations and freedom of the press. Behind the scenes. Has been careful not to alienate Burkina Faso further. Maintains limited communication channels to monitor counterterrorism efforts. Concern about growing Russian and Iranian influence. Impact. No harsh sanctions yet. The U.S. is trying to contain Russian expansion without losing access to Sahel. 3. European Union development aid cuts and sanctions threats. Official actions. Froze development funds and security training programs. Criticize a junta for lack of democratic transition and media suppression. Issued statements denouncing possible Russian proxy presence in Burkina Faso. EU stance. Promotes democracy and human rights, but its leverage has sharply declined. Traoré accuses the EU of pushing a double standard, treating African security challenges with detachment and arrogance. 4. International NGOs and Western media. Critical coverage. Media often frame Traoré as a military strongman or a Russian proxy. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have raised alarms about arbitrary arrests, crackdowns on journalists, civil liberties under strain. Traoré's reaction labels these groups as neo-colonial watchdogs, claims the West is more concerned about freedom of speech than the lives lost to terrorism. 5. Sanctions avoided so far. The lack of full sanctions by the US or EU reflects strategic caution. The West fears that isolation may drive Burkina Faso deeper into the arms of Russia, Iran, or China, destabilize a region already battling extremist insurgencies. Summary: a cold front, not a cold war. The Western response to Traoré is measured but increasingly distant. Traoré's government faces diplomatic isolation, but remains popular among African youth. Western powers are rethinking their influence model in Africa as military-led, anti-Western regimes rise across the Sahel. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe for more real stories from Africa and beyond, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. This is Revolution Show, and we'll see you in the next chapter.